I'm Andrew, and I'm setting out to make better videos for diesel enthusiasts. Follow along as I review products, do how-tos, and share my personal trucks here on Just Diesels.
Alright guys, today is a video that a lot of you have been waiting for a long time. On Instagram, on YouTube, all of you have been commenting since I got the second gen that it was about time that I add some power to the truck. And I resisted for years trying to keep it stock, but I finally gave in. And today, I'm going to run you guys through how to make about 450 to 475 horsepower reliably on a second gen. And I know that's not a crazy horsepower goal, but the whole thing here was to have a truck that is still fun to drive, I can still tow a trailer, but it's reliable. I don't have a truck where I have to worry about anything crazy, anything over the top. It's a very reliable, useful power goal. So, I'm going to run you guys through that. I'm going to show you guys 0 to 60 times, and I'm going to show you how to do it reliably. This video is going to be broken into 3 main parts. I'm going to run you guys through what the upgrades are, the actual key power addition items here. Then we're going to take the truck out on the road. I'm going to do 0 to 60 times and compare that against stock and against the Edge tuner on its own. Finally, I'm going to run you guys through all of these supporting parts and supporting modifications that are needed to put this power to the ground reliably for years to come. Because making 400 to 500 horsepower on a second gen with no supporting mods is a recipe for disaster. So, let's dive into this. To start out with, let's get into the fun stuff, which is the actual turbo injectors. That's what's really making the extra power on this truck. For the turbo, I reached out to Fenley Performance. Now the combo Fenley recommended was his 606712 turbo, which is a T3 manifold stock location single turbo, mixed with a set of Flux Mach 4 injectors. Now the turbo itself is basically going to be a modified and machined out turbo with a billet turbine wheel. Now this turbo is rated for 300 to 475 wheel horsepower and about 50 psi of boost. And that's actually exactly what I'm seeing out of this truck right now, is right around 50 psi of boost. Now this is not the biggest, craziest, or wildest turbo that Fenley makes, but it's a perfect daily driver towing setup where you're maintaining your low end power, right? If you go with a huge turbo, you're losing a lot of low end to kind of gain high end. This is a turbo where you're not sacrificing a ton of low end power, but it's still gonna make a lot more boost than stock, be a little more snappy up top than stock, and kind of not fall off in that upper range of RPM. Fenley does these turbos with polished housings, with powder coated housings, all kinds of cool stuff, but I opted for the most boring stock appearing setup, and that's because I'm in California, I'm trying to fly under the radar here, and this looks like a stock turbo. So to the untrained eye, nothing's been modified on this truck, right? Wink. The next thing is injectors. Now the Flux Mach 4 injectors are based off of the Mach platform from Flux. These injectors have been out since 2001 in some varied form. So they're a very proven setup. They have a 10-year warranty, and they're actually gonna be using Bosch nozzles. So this is a very high-end injector for about 150 horsepower and 2,700 milliliters a minute of fuel flow. Now the goal of both of these is to basically have minimal smoke, optimal drivability, low EGTs, and basically have as much low-end power as I can, because the whole goal here is to have a truck that can tow, that I can daily drive and is fun, and I'm not having to drive over that 2,000 RPM range constantly to try and get the turbos to spool. I would have loved to have done compounds on this truck, but I'm trying to stay under the radar. I still need to smog this truck, and so this setup is still smog friendly-ish. Now, the other thing that's controlling this whole power setup and adding power is the Edge Comp Tuner. I did a standalone review on this tuner on my YouTube channel if you want to do a deep dive into that more specifically, but basically this is Edge's new tuner for the second gen platform. This is going to be squeezing as much power as possible out of the truck. It's going to tap the VP44 for more overall fuel flow, and it's doing some unique stuff on the fueling side to actually squeeze more power out of this truck than any previous Edge tuner and a lot of the other tuners on the market. This is not a custom tuning capable tuner, so I was very curious to see how this balanced out with the injectors and turbo, and I was very happy about that, but we'll kind of get into the driving impressions in a second. But that's going to be the basic core 3 items. So 606712 turbo, Flux Mach 4 injectors, and the new Edge Comp tuner. Now, let's get this truck on the road and see how all that puts the power down.
So we are in the truck again, and what we're going to be doing is a 0 to 60, and we're going to be doing comparison of stock tune with the additions of the injectors and turbo, so we can actually get a benchmark of how much those add on their own. And then I'm going to do this again on tune 5 with the injectors and turbo. So we're going to kind of have a stair-step run here. So right now I'm at stock power. I've got the stopwatch right here ready to go, and we're going to do a 0 to 60. And just a reminder, just like last time, there's a slight downhill and a slight uphill here, so this is not going to relate to flat time, but this is the exact same section I did last time. So with stock, like a completely stock truck, and the stage 2 tier 1 transmission, just as a reminder, our time was just a hair over 14 seconds. So let's see how much we can shave off of that in a 0 to 60 with the addition of the Fenley Turbo and the new Flux Mach 4 injectors. All right, 1, 2, 3. And foot to the floor here. Whoa, already way more. And bingo, right there. So that was 8 seconds. That was an 8-second 0 to 60 time with just the addition of the turbo and the injectors. So stock tuning, that's a really, really impressive mark. It was actually, so it was 8.98, so almost 9 seconds, but right around there, as precise as I can be with my finger on the thing. But that's a pretty solid improvement for sure. So now I'm back at the start position. We are in tune 5. I have max fuel coming in at 10 psi of boost. That should give us plenty of fuel down low. I've been usually running it at tune 5 somewhere around like 20 psi for max fueling, just to kind of cut the smoke. But for this, we are just gonna go, full tilt. So on our mark, 1, 2, 3. And 50. Okay, so that was basically just a touch over 8 seconds. So we are at 8 and some change. So definitely an improvement, huge improvement over stock. I mean, we've pretty much almost cut our 0 to 60 time in half. So stock was around 14 seconds and some change, and we are now at 8 seconds and some change. So that is a pretty wild change. And that's definitely proof in the pudding. This is a lot faster than stock.
All right, so hopefully that gives you guys kind of the best picture I can possibly give you of what it's like to actually drive this truck. But we have basically taken the 0 to 60 time down from a little over 14 seconds to right around 8 seconds. So we have literally almost lopped the 0 to 60 time in half on this truck, which is awesome. To me, that is more than enough. That is a very fun, very drivable, very street-friendly setup. I can still tow, no crazy EGTs, but this truck is an absolute ride to drive. And if I want to, I can tune it way down, put it in stock tune 1, and the truck's like very, very stock-ish feeling. Tune 5, this thing's an absolute blast. So one thing I want to talk about with respect to the tuning is actually how impressed I was with the Edge comp's ability to kind of flex and adapt to the new injectors and the new turbo. One of the big hits on the Edge is that it doesn't allow for custom tuning. So that's why a lot of people use the Quadzilla platform. For me, I found that the Quadzilla platform is really cumbersome. The interface with the user, how the system all works, how it's Wi-Fi based, all that stuff is just a pain to me. And so if I could get away with the Edge comp, I was gonna try and do it. But I was a little bit nervous about how it would play with the bigger injectors and the bigger turbo. And I have to say, I was really impressed. So what made this setup work is the fact that I can control fueling depending on boost pressure. So within each tune, I can actually go in on the app on my phone and fine tune where the fueling comes in depending on the boost. So I found that in the lower tunes, I was able to actually bring full fueling in a lot earlier. But on tune 5, I had to wait to about maybe 20 PSI to bring in full fueling to kind of cut down on smoke. Now, if I brought in full fueling at 0 PSI, there was definitely a good puff of smoke at the very beginning, but it cleared up. The only place where I had issues is if the truck would lug for any reason. I am running 35s with stock 355 gears, so definitely going against the norm there. But if the truck did lug, I would find that the truck would smoke pretty heavily. So I had to up boost pressure for full fueling, and that really solved my issues. But for anyone that's out there shopping different tuners, it is really nice that Edge has that ability to kind of fine tune the tuning depending on the boost pressure. So for whatever it's worth, I've actually been very happy with the setup. I probably will not be switching to quad. I'm gonna stick with the Edge comp because I think as a whole package, it's working very well for me. And of course, that's only part of the puzzle. So now we're gonna get into the supporting modifications that are needed to put all this to the ground. And I'm gonna try and put these in order of importance. Now, number one, I think on this list, this is a very tough spot for number one, but number one, I think, is going to be some sort of lift pump on the truck. Now, again, I did a standalone video on this, but on this truck, I have a Fass lift pump. Now, the VP44 trucks are notorious for having the VP44 go out, and that is because the block-mounted lift pump, the low-pressure pump that's actually feeding fuel from the tank to the VP44, is very weak, and the vibration of the block kills that pump. So I went with a Fass lift pump that is a frame-mounted pump that basically gives a constant 18 psi of pressure to the VP44 at all RPM ranges. It's also adding filtration, all kinds of awesome stuff. Again, I have a whole video on that specifically, but that is a very, very, very key item on the second gen platform if you're looking to make power and you're looking to turn up the VP44 with a pump tap like this edge comp requires. Now, the next thing on this list, and again, this was a very tough spot to fill, but I'm gonna go with transmission upgrades. Now, this particular truck is an automatic, so I went to Tier 1 transmissions out of Phoenix, Arizona, and they did a stage 2 build on this transmission. Again, I have a whole standalone video that walks through all the ins and outs of that transmission, but that alone, even on a stock truck, just completely transformed the way this truck drives. So that is going to be mandatory. If you have a second gen with an automatic transmission, you know that it will absolutely barely handle stock power. There's no way it's gonna handle 450 horsepower. So if you're looking in that range, I would go with their stage 2 transmission. If you're looking to go past 500, that's when you'll step up to their stage 3, anything like that. But fantastic people to work with, really awesome at kind of catering the trans build to your needs. They did a fantastic job on mine. Now, for you guys with manual transmissions, you will want to do some sort of clutch upgrade, whether it's a big single or a dual disc, but the factory clutch will not hold this power level very long. You'll probably hold it for a little bit, but you're definitely gonna be slipping, especially when towing. But for the manual guys, you're looking at a much lower total bill than us automatic transmission guys who basically have to do a complete overhaul on the transmission. Now, the other upgrades that are gonna go with this, and they kind of all go together, are gonna be valve springs, push rods, head studs. Those are three things that are kind of key to making power, especially at higher RPM bands. The head studs in particular are going to be key because we're upping in-cylinder pressures, right? We've increased timing, we've increased boost pressure, so now we have much higher in-cylinder pressures. And so those head studs are going to be key to actually keep the head on the block. Now, you can try and get away without head studs for a while, but eventually you're going to blow your head gasket, you're going to lift the head off the block. So I want to get ahead of that and do head studs. So Maximum Diesels down in San Jacinto, California, handled installing the turbo injectors, head studs, valve springs, and push rods. Now, speaking of valve springs and push rods, these are two items that are kind of cherry on the cake items. They aren't mandatory, they aren't required, but they're going to be really useful if you're running higher RPMs and higher in-cylinder pressures. To start with the valve springs, basically what those are going to be doing is keeping the valve seated. So as you run higher RPMs and you run higher in-cylinder pressures with advanced timing from the tuner and with higher boost pressures from the bigger turbo, you're going to start trying to kind of lift those valves. And so those valve springs are going to keep those seated. The push rods, again, those are going to kind of work in tandem with the higher rate springs. But basically that whole setup is just going to make the valve train more reliable at high RPM, higher in-cylinder pressure. So again, not as mandatory as the transmission, the Fass, and all those things, but I would say that the valve springs and push rods are a nice thing to have if you are going to push the truck, and I wanted this thing to be reliable. You know, the other thing I added to this truck just as a fun bonus was a fleece coolant bypass. To me, if you're ever pulling the head off, you're doing any head work, you have the transmission out, whatever, anytime it's easier to access that rear freeze plug, it's just nice to put a fleece coolant bypass on there. It is going to allow for more even coolant flow through the block. So traditionally, coolant flow goes from cylinder 1 through 6. So by the time it gets to 6, it's already been heated by 1 through 5. With the fleece coolant bypass, the coolant is able to have an even temperature all the way through the block. And so you see a lot less failures out of cylinder number 6, which is usually where you see failures on Cummins trucks. All right, so I hope this video helped you guys out to try and plan a very, very streetable, practical, but reliable power setup for your second gen Cummins truck. This is not some out of touch, wild, 1,000 horsepower build. This is basically a very practical, towable, daily drivable setup that will last for years to come. So I tried to kind of put the recipe together for you guys to make it as easy as possible. Now I've linked all of the parts that I've used in the description below if you guys want to check this stuff out and price it out for your own truck. But this should be a really solid setup to make a fun, enjoyable, awesome truck all around for you guys to drive. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I'll catch you on the next one.